All good things must come to an end. Nothing lasts forever in the world, and of course that also applies to NBA basketball dynasties, which okay, maybe some of you don't consider this era of Warriors basketball a dynasty, but 4 championships within a decade is about as close to a dynasty as you're gonna get. But like all of the great dynasties that came before them, whether it be the Spurs or Lakers of the 2000s, the Bulls of the 90s, or the epic battle between the Lakers and Celtics of the 80s, eventually they die off. But while we knew the end of the Warriors was near, and most of us even saw this coming going into the season, I don't think many of us would have expected them to go out in the manner they did and getting absolutely obliterated by the Sacramento Kings in a winner-go-home game, a Kings team who themselves have struggled down the stretch and are without some of their key rotational players. And because the Warriors went out in such a bad fashion for a team that had title aspirations, a team that has the highest payroll in the league and paid the highest amount of tax for having such a large payroll, a team whose core is mainly comprised of older players, the question now is, what's next for the Golden State Warriors and their future? As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribe, and in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, I don't think anyone will deny that what the Warriors have been able to do over the last decade has been phenomenal. Winning 4 championships is no easy feat, and yes, even if that means Kevin Durant taking the easy way out to win titles and pulling one of the weakest moves in NBA history, but they still won 4 titles. But there comes a time where as a franchise you hit a crossroads and say, we can't keep running this back in the hopes that we can still be in the mix for a championship and need to start thinking about our future. Because it's pretty clear, the Warriors team, as currently constructed, has hit its ceiling. As incredible as Steph has been and still playing at a high level at age 36, even he himself has declined slightly with his shot and has shot the Warriors out of games sometimes this season. But regardless of Steph still being a superstar in this league, this team has hit its ceiling. And when you're a play-in team that misses the playoffs, but you have the highest payroll in the NBA and one of the oldest rosters, it's time to take a hard look at yourself and make some changes. And it starts with Klay Thompson. Look, I know the Warriors have done right by Klay. They gave him that max contract despite coming off an ACL injury, which was a huge gamble, but they did it more so to reward him for everything he has done for the franchise. He's been with the organization since they drafted him back in 2011. Obviously, without Klay, the Warriors aren't the dynasty team we know of them today, but they absolutely cannot do right by him this go-around. They made that mistake this past offseason by giving Draymond Green a 4-year, $100 million contract, which I talked about in a prior video as being one of the most regrettable contracts of the 2023 offseason when you factor in Draymond's age, production, and the antics and headaches that come with him. Paying him that kind of money until he's 37, fully guaranteed, has already come back to bite them and is going to get worse over time. Doing the same with Klay Thompson would be front office malpractice. Now look, if Klay is willing to take an insane team-friendly discount because he wants to try and make it work with this core and wants to stay with his buddies, or even take the vet minimum, then fine, that's one thing. But we all know Klay isn't going to do that. Even though it's pretty clear he's washed and not the same player we once knew, he's not at that stage yet in his career where he's taking minimum deals. And at the end of the day, there will be some teams out there with interest in Klay Thompson and are willing to pay him good money. Teams with cap space that are in desperate need of some shooting. Even if it means Klay just plays a role as a spot-up shooter to space the floor for them, which is kind of all he is at this stage in his career. So while the Warriors do have some leverage going into this offseason with Klay's free agency, it's not a situation where there's going to be zero interest in Klay. He will have suitors, and he will be getting more than a vet minimum contract, or hell, even more than $10 million a year at this point. Now, he's probably not going to get the kind of contract he thinks he's worth, one, because not a lot of teams have a ton of cap space, and two, the landscape of the NBA and the new collective bargaining agreement does not incentivize teams to spend like crazy unless it's for an actual star level player. The worst situation you can possibly find yourself in as a franchise is giving out a bad contract well below a player's value and then being stuck with it without the ability to trade said contract down the line. But regardless, Klay will get paid, and I would estimate something in the range of $12 to $15 million a year on a short-term deal, probably something like 2 years. And if you're the Warriors, you have to be asking yourself, is it worth to keep Klay Thompson around? Not because it's the right thing to do or reward him for his loyalty, but is it worth it when you already have the highest payroll in the league, you're paying millions of dollars in taxes, and already have $174 million committed going into next season, not even factoring in their other free agents or non-guaranteed deals like with Chris Paul, which is $30 million. Your team missed the playoffs. Can you really justify spending another $200+ million in player salary and near $400 million in total on the roster when you factor in the tax penalty? As much as the Warriors preach loyalty and a winning mindset, they're not going to do that. This is a business after all. And it quite possibly would be the worst business decision for them to keep running this crew back and paying Klay Thompson another loyalty deal. They already gave him his loyalty contract after tearing his ACL and him not playing for 2 straight seasons on a max deal. So when it comes to answering the question of what's next for the Warriors, let's first take a look at their current cap sheet. As I mentioned, they currently have $174 million committed going into next season. That's already above the tax threshold, which is slated to come in around $171.3 million, with the first tax apron at $178.7 and the second at $189.6. This does not factor in Chris Paul's non-guaranteed deal of $30 million. And of course, there are other free agents going into this offseason in Klay Thompson, Gary Payton, and Dario Saric. So already, they're over the tax line with empty roster spots for their unsigned free agents. Now, the problem for the Warriors and the fact that they were over the second apron this past season and are projected to at least hit that first apron if they're even able to just re-sign one of their free agents or retain Chris Paul, is that they would not have the ability to use their full mid-level exception to sign other free agents to go over the cap. The new CBA does not allow teams over the tax aprons to use various exceptions to sign players to the mid-level exception or biannual exception, as well as signing players off the buyout market. So while it may seem like it's not a big deal that the Warriors have all the salary committed because they can just sign rotational players to mid-level deals or vet minimums as they have done in the past, they will not be allowed to do so unless they can get their spend below the tax aprons, which is easier said than done when the bulk of your biggest contracts are going to be incredibly hard to move in a trade. Andrew Wiggins, based on his performance the last couple of seasons, has arguably one of the worst contracts in the league. Draymond Green, we talked about him, getting paid over $25 million into his late 30s, clearly declining and becoming more of a headache with every passing season. Chris Paul, who is nearing 40, and you have to think about his $30 million, and then of course Steph Curry, who would get a massive haul for you in the form of a trade, by the way, but we all know the Warriors are never going to be trading Steph Curry. It might make sense if they really want to blow up the whole roster and just get an insane amount of draft picks and young players for an aging Steph, but there is no chance they do that when they have the greatest shooter of all time and their cash cow and the amount of revenue he generates for that team. So in short, there really isn't much the Warriors can do to meaningfully improve their team. When they can't use their exceptions to sign free agents, they don't have much leverage in the form of trade deals when it comes to their bigger contracts, and what we haven't even talked about yet in their potential extensions for some of their key younger players in Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody. Now, they don't have to extend them this offseason. Kuminga and Moody will be going into the final years of their rookie scale deals, and they could wait for them to become restricted free agents the following offseason in 2025. But if you're the Warriors, you have to start thinking about your future. And it may make sense to lock these guys in now before you run the risk of other teams offering them big contracts in 2025 and you're unable to match, again, because you can't afford it given your current cap sheet. Now, this isn't to say the Warriors are hopeless and have no way of improving their roster, because they can get creative in a number of ways. They can obviously try and package Kuminga and Moody, maybe a future first-round pick, even though they don't have that many picks to work with, and they can get a solid player, even a star-level player, to complement Curry and act as a number 2 option. They could even, say, package one of their bad contracts of Andrew Wiggins or Draymond Green with Kuminga and Moody as an incentive for getting Wiggins and Draymond's salary off their books. Like, here you go, you take one of these guys and we'll give you some of our young up-and-coming players. Or even do that in the form of a sign and trade with Klay Thompson this offseason so they don't let Klay walk for nothing, and it gives them more cap flexibility depending on the amount of salary they would bring in return for a trade. But if you look to move Kuminga or Moody, or potentially both, to try and get win-now type pieces to go after one last chance at a title run for Steph Curry, knowing full well that Steph only has so many years left. You're seeing Klay and Draymond starting to decline. Wiggins is almost a shell of himself from that 2022 title run. Is that really the way to go? If anything, you should be prioritizing some of your younger guys, including Podziemski, looking for ways to get out of your bad contracts and building for the future. Like, the other problem for the Warriors is that they don't have much draft capital to work with. The Warriors owe their now lottery pick to the Portland Trailblazers in this upcoming draft, unless it falls in the top 4, which is very likely at less than 10%. If it does actually fall into the top 4 and doesn't convey to Portland, then it's top 1 protected in 25 and then owed to them in 2026. They do own their picks in 27, 28, and 29, with 2030 being lightly protected to the Wizards in the Jordan Poole deal. And then they don't have any of their second round picks until 2029. So you really don't have that much in terms of draft capital that you can either work with for the future or use in the form of trades. You have limited assets, your biggest asset you're not going to trade, and the most expensive payroll in the league with a tax bill nearly the equivalent of your players' salaries, all for losing in the play-in. As much as Warrior fans may deny it because they think Joe Lacob is some basketball mastermind, the team's future is pretty bleak, and I have a hard time seeing them getting out of this for the foreseeable future. Even if Klay does walk, they're still in a very tough position from a cap and asset perspective, and the league as a whole has caught up to them. Joe Lacob once said after the new CBA rules were implemented that it didn't matter. He was going to find a way to win. That's what great organizations do. They find a way to win. Well, that level of arrogance and cockiness has backfired on the franchise, who are now realizing they've backed themselves into a corner with very few avenues out of it. So I guess to answer the question, where do the Warriors go from here? What's next for this franchise? I honestly don't know. Because while we can sit here and say they just need to blow it up and start over, it's not that easy when you have players that are losing value with every passing season and a stubborn owner who still believes this core can win. That said, I do think we saw Klay Thompson play his last game in a Warriors uniform, which is sad that he went out in such a horrible fashion with 0 points and going 0 for 10 in the game. Klay soaked it all in as he walked off the court, and while it's hard to see the end of an era, I think we can all agree that this was coming sooner rather than later. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think the Warriors should do going into the offseason? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.